Hello there. I am really excited. This afternoon in Washington, D.C., the United States Senate voted 63 to 37 to begin discussing the U.S. participation in the war in Yemen. This is fantastic news. It is a huge step forward. And today I'd like to talk about what it is and what it isn't. Unfortunately, this action today in Washington, D.C. is not yet going to do anything to help the people of Yemen. The war will continue, and this is just one small step. But I think it's important to emphasize just what a blow this is for Saudi Arabia, for the Trump administration, and honestly, for the whole concept of the Imperial Presidency. This is nowhere near as far as we need to go, but it is a tremendous step forward. And I think it's important to let the Senate know that, to appreciate what has been done here. U.S. politicians politicians everywhere are kind of weak people who thrive on acclamation. They don't take brave stands unless they are encouraged to do so. So let's encourage them to do this. This is an incredible thing that has happened, and I'd like to discuss it a little more today. Before we get into the details of why this is both disappointing and very, very inspiring, let's let some of the senators that sponsored the resolution that was passed today sort of give us some basics.
Number one, it is a horrific humanitarian disaster, the worst taking place in the world today. We're talking about 85,000 children who have already died and millions more who may succumb to starvation if we do not end this horrific war. Second of all, I think the American people are catching on to the nature of the despotic regime in Saudi Arabia, which is leading this effort, and we should not be part of their military adventurism, in my view.
That's the left heard from. Now let's take a look at it from the right.
I completely agree with what he's saying. It's important to remember one of the distinguishing characteristics about our chief executive in our system is that unlike the King of England, our president doesn't have the power unilaterally to go to war. It's one of the points that James Madison made in Federalist 69. It's one of the reasons this was set up this way. In order for us to put American blood on the line by committing us to an act of war, you have to have the branch of government most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals, Congress, act. That hasn't happened here, and it's wrong to continue a war until that's happened.
Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee come from some very different places, but I think they both make very important arguments. They're both arguments that mean a lot to me. We should not be participating in the war in Yemen out of common decency, and the fact that it is happening at all is an absolute travesty. So, the question is, what did we win today? And the answer is, honestly, for the people of Yemen, not much. This is just one step. The War Powers Resolution is a tremendously powerful tool that Congress has to restrain presidents that are undertaking military endeavors without their approval, and it's not used very often. It's exciting that we actually had the Senate vote to consider using it. But it's important to point out that just the fact that they're going to talk about it doesn't mean it's going to move very far forward. It's quite possible that partisan identity will take over again. It's very, very likely that what actually gets passed by the Senate will be amended and made toothless. We've talked about stuff like that before on this channel. And at the end of the day, with this Congress, not the Congress this year, rather than the new one that's getting sworn in next year, it's not actually going to go forward because the Republican leadership in the House that's on its way out, the sort of mini Trumps, have decided that their final legacy should be quashing the version of this legislation that was going to happen in the House of Representatives. So it's important to remember that the fight is just starting. This isn't the end of the war in Yemen, but it could be the end of the beginning, as Winston Churchill would put it. We're not there yet, but it is a step forward, and this absolutely is a punch in the face for some people and entities that deserve a punch in the face. This vote in the Senate completely shifts Saudi Arabia's diplomatic calculus. This was already up in the air because of the reaction to the Jamal Khashoggi killing, but it seems like Yemen is now going to be the weapon that is used to punish Saudi Arabia. It's, of course, a great shame that it wasn't the 50,000 people that have been murdered in Yemen that brought that about, or the estimated 80,000 people who have already starved to death in Yemen. And it's a shame that it was just one person, but I'll take it. But this vote is a sign that the U.S. legislature might finally actually be standing up. This is how the Constitution is supposed to work. People are angry. People are sick of this war. People don't understand what it is for. And our representatives seem to actually be standing up and doing something about that. Sort of standing up and pushing against that. And it's very unlikely, to my mind, even at this point, that a war powers resolution will be approved by both houses of Congress and be pushed forward. But what this does is it changes the calculus. It changes the sort of math that everybody's doing in their head when they're trying to figure out how things are going to work out. Yes, Trump still supports the Saudis. Yes, the military still supports the Saudis, but it's becoming more and more costly. Already, the Trump administration has backed off of fueling, aerial refueling. Of course, they only did that after the Saudis had completely developed that capability, according to some reports, but that is a step forward. And the Trump administration is going to have to keep stepping back if Congress keeps pushing forward. This is a tremendous shift, and it's a sign of just how sick people are getting of Saudi Arabia. It's a pretty amazing thing to watch, and I think it's a really, really hopeful sign. This is a kick in the teeth for Saudi Arabia, even if it never goes any further, because the Trump administration isn't going to be able to support Saudi Arabia as enthusiastically as it wants to. It's a good sign. This is also a kick in the teeth to Donald Trump. It is not an exaggeration to say that Donald Trump has been bought by Saudi Arabia. You can see this in the progressively more and more fantastic justifications he keeps coming up with for standing by Saudi Arabia. The numbers that he's mentioning never really made much sense. That $110 billion arms deal from last year wasn't actually true. It's been debunked in many, many different outlets. It relied on a whole bunch of old business, a lot of promises for business that's never going to materialize. But even that $110 billion figure isn't enough anymore. He's coming up with $400 billion and talking about how thousands of jobs in the United States are reliant on this Saudi arms trade. None of that is true. It's fantasy. And in fact, Saudi Arabia is a lot more reliant on us for arms trade than we are on them. But the same, unfortunately, is not true for our president. One of the main sort of sources of revenue for the Trump organization is a series of hotels and clubs, primarily in the United States, but across the world. And one of their main sources of revenue is the Saudi royal family. This is not a conspiracy theory. I'm not making this up. This has been widely reported, yet somehow not shouted from all the rafters. Donald Trump has been purchased by Saudi Arabia, and it's outrageous. It's outrageous that the U.S. Congress hasn't been investigating these ties in great detail, and one of the things to be optimistic about in the new year is the fact that at least the House of Representatives will be doing so. But today, the Senate struck a blow against Donald Trump. Over the past 2 years, we've been hearing a lot from folks in both the Democratic and Republican parties about how outraged they are and how angry they are about how impolite Donald Trump is. Specifically, certain Republicans like I think it's Bob Corker and Jeff Flake have become famous for sending out tweets about how their feelings are hurt and then voting with Donald Trump all the time. Today, the Senate stood up. Today, the Senate, including many previously cowardly Republicans, hit Donald Trump where it hurts, in his pocketbook. The Trump Organization may not be getting quite as much Saudi money in 2019. The last target that has been hit by this Senate action is the most important one to me as a U.S. citizen. This action that the Senate took today was a blow struck against the Imperial Presidency. According to the U.S. Constitution, the legislature is supposed to be very important, and there's supposed to be checks and balances. It's supposed to compete with the president. It's supposed to compete with the executive branch. For the past 100 years, that's been shifting, and obviously the foreign policy, sort of war powers aspects of this are just one small part of the problem. But today, by taking this action, by taking this vote against what the president wanted to do, not just Donald Trump, also what Barack Obama wanted to do, by standing up against this horrific war in Yemen, by standing up against something that two presidents created, the Senate is sort of getting its mojo back. It's a fantastic thing to see. If the endless wars fought by the United States are ever going to end, this is how it's going to happen. The Congress has to take its power back. It has to speak up for the American people against a power-mad imperial presidency and against a military-industrial complex gone mad. It is tremendously inspiring to see the Senate stand up like this, and I think that this really is the first step towards finally bringing peace back to the United States and back to the world. It's tremendously inspiring stuff. We have so much further to go, but it's a very hopeful thing to see. And if there's any way we can encourage the U.S. Congress to continue taking actions like this, we should do it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And if you'd like to get updates whenever I upload a video, you can click on the bell next to the subscribe button. Thanks.